Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me at the Holy War channel. I have a great guest for you today and a great topic. And if you've been waiting, my apologies. We were having technical difficulties. And but here we are. So today's topic, my guest, Ayman Jawad Al-Tamimi. He's a young scholar and a translator, and because of our technical issues, all the stuff I had pulled up that I wanted to say is now gone, of course. So he can tell you a little bit about himself when I bring him on, but he is a scholar and a fellow at various think tanks, and he's written books, and we're going to be talking about the book that he just published. It's a translation, and it's about Archbishop Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada, if I recall. I actually wanted to pull it up, and I did pull it up. Yeah, Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada's Minor Histories. And this is a very important book, which I came across, and I've actually used other translations for my books, like Sword and Scimitar and Defenders of the West, because this is a pivotal history of Spain, of the early centuries of Arabs and the Moors and the Muslims in Spain, from the initial conquest in 711 until I think, and Eamon will tell us, but Archbishop Rodrigo, I believe he's born, I don't know, I want to say like 1180, and I think he dies 1230 or so. So he's actually there during the pivotal reigns of King Alfonso of Castile, and I believe his grandson, Ferdinand III, or Fernando, who I write about, both of them actually in my book. So this is very exciting for me, and it's good for you, and we're going to get right into it. So without further ado.
So this work, I recently published it with Manchester University Press, is a translation and study of what is called in scholarship the minor histories of Archbishop Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada. They're called the minor histories because these are supplements, as it were, to his main historical book, which is called the Gothic History. And basically the idea of all these books is that they constitute a history of Spain as commissioned by King Ferdinand III. And noting that King Ferdinand himself, he had quite a big role in reconquests of Muslim territory, most notably the reconquest of Cordoba in 1236. And Rodrigo himself, too, actually, he was involved in crusading in Iberia, most notably in the 1210s, when he participated in the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa with Ferdinand III's predecessor, Alfonso VIII. And after the unification of the kingdoms of Castile and Leon in 1230, Rodrigo actually led a campaign to retake a Muslim-held fort called Castellata, and that was by grant from King Ferdinand III. So within, of course, these minor histories, going back to the topic of the book itself, within the minor histories, most importantly is Rodrigo's Historia Arabum, or History of the Arabs, which you can basically consider the first surviving Western monograph that explicitly focuses on the topic of Arab and Islamic history.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
I guess some people said maybe if we mute each other, mute yourself while I speak, and vice versa. Maybe that'll take care of this translation business. But okay, yeah, that's fascinating. Like I said, I've come across his writings, and I've actually quoted him at some length. Important character, and I do know that a lot of his history is pretty comprehensive, and he actually goes all the way. Okay, good. Someone said no more echo. Great. And that his history goes all the way, back to the origins of Spain. I think he talks about the other people who invaded and conquered the Goths and whatnot. And why don't you give us a very quick summary about that? Actually, first of all, is from a historiographical point of view, how is he viewed? Is he seen as an accurate historian, or is he seen as well, obviously all historians from that era are not going to be seen as fully accurate, but in general, how is he perceived by modern day historians?
I mean, this depends what books of his you're looking at. Looking at the original mentions in the prologue that he's been asked by King Ferdinand III to write a history of Spain, and it's quite typical actually of the time in when medieval historians or historians living in that era, that is, or writers are asked to write something historical project, they'll deprecate themselves and say, "Oh, I have only a meager wisdom and a rather uneloquent pen, but I will nonetheless do my best to meet the task at hand." So the history of Spain that he does, it goes all the way from the purported first settlement of Spain by the descendants of Noah's son Japheth. It extends all the way from there up to 1236, roughly. Of course, there is a lot of in the early sections of the Gothic history. There is a lot of influence from Greco-Roman mythology. There's discussion about Hercules' purported exploits in Spain and where the name Spain comes from. So Hispania, he traces it to Hispan, who was a purported nobleman that Hercules appointed as as ruler of Spain after he left. So, I mean, that's not really, taken as of great historical veracity by scholars. But if you look specifically at the history of the Arabs that he wrote as the last book of his series, of his History of Spain series, there he goes all the way from Muhammad, the founder of Islam, goes all the way up to the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate in Cordoba and the rise of the Ta'ifa kingdoms, just before the Berber Almoravids came from Africa. What is interesting, actually, is that particularly the information there that goes after 750, when he's only focusing on the Arabs and Muslims in Spain, not the Arabs in general, Muslims in general. It's interesting because actually they don't have surviving parallels for most of the information he gives in Latin sources. And actually, if you compare with later Arabic sources, there are quite a lot of parallels. So actually, almost practically every paragraph you could compare it with Arabic language sources. So actually, the Historia Arabum, actually, in particularly for its later sections, is actually regarded as a good source to take and compare with later Arabic sources when you're describing, say, the rule of various Umayyad emirs in Andalus after 756, when Abdurrahman I established the independent Umayyad emirate out of Cordoba.
Okay, well that's really interesting, especially the early stuff for me. Actually, the Hispania etymology, I never knew that. Okay, let's start with the Islam stuff. I know that he actually does a kind of a deep dive into the life of Muhammad, and I think he's arguably one of the earliest European commentators and historians, essentially, of Muhammad. And so, why don't you start with his, and we don't even have to get into how correct he is with the traditional Islamic narrative. That'll be self-evident, and we can talk about that as it comes out. But I'm mostly interested in really getting, a 13th century or late 12th century, Christian Europeans' take on what was Islam, who was Muhammad, what was because I assume his would be a standard take. It's not like he was an Islamophobe and everyone else looked favorably upon the Moors. So why don't you give us in a nutshell, the whole history, how he perceives and how he describes the life of Muhammad, and including and emphasizing basically, how Christians from that era saw Muhammad and obviously his followers.
So, when in the prologue to his Historia Arabum, he actually does mention when he's describing the life of Muhammad, he wants to use both what he calls fideli relatione, or faithful reporting, and scripta eorum, their writings, so the writings of Muslims and Arabs to describe them. So what you actually see in the life of Muhammad that he does is quite an interesting combination of both reports external to Islamic tradition, but also stuff that really almost reads like a direct translation of some of the most traditional Islamic source materials on the life of Muhammad. I mean, particularly, for example, if you look at, he has a whole chapter on the Isra and Mi'raj. I mean, he actually says that Muhammad came up with that with that story, as a way to deceive people and bind people to his law, to his religion. But you look at passages, I mean, it looks like a very, very close parallels with Arabic source materials that you find, for example, whether in the Hadith collections or in Ibn Ishaq as transmitted by Ibn Hisham. Not all the details necessarily precisely correspond to one single Islamic source, but he's clearly making use of Islamic source materials there. The external material, for example, if you look at in Rodrigo's telling, the culmination of Muhammad's career politically was, he says that Muhammad became the king of the Arabs in Damascus, that he led conquest of the Levant region. That derives from a 8th century Iberian chronicle, the Mos Arabic Chronicle, or the Chronicle of 754, which I'm sure you've actually used that in your own historical research too. So that was actually something that he'd taken from the Chronicle of 754. There's also some other details that are, less precise or less clear where the source is. So, for example, he says that Muhammad was instructed by a Jewish astrologer in the Old and New Testament in the natural sciences. That's probably what, there are a lot of course, medieval writings about Muhammad. A lot of them have the motif that, there was a Jew or a Christian who taught Muhammad the Old and New Testament. This is why the Quran has, or why Islam has material from Judaism and Christianity, that, it's borrowed. So the consensus view is that theme of the Jewish astrologer, it might be, for example, a combination of an Islamic tradition about a Jew supposedly looking at the signs and the star signs at the time of Muhammad's birth and saying that that a prophet has been born, and maybe a combination of legends about Bahira, a perverted monk who foresaw Muhammad's prophethood and became in many Christian writings the instructor of Muhammad in Jewish and Christian teachings. Just to move on also then to the portrayal of Muhammad, I mean, it is very typical of the time that he doesn't see Muhammad as a benign figure. Actually, his whole point in writing the biography of Muhammad is he wants to say that I wanted to expose the Sawitia or savagery of the Muslim people, and that the young should look at these false legends these false tales that Muhammad contrived and learn to stay away from them and actually be by the bonds of kindness. That's a reference to bonds of Adam. Sorry, that's a reference to Hosea actually. So for Rodrigo, as is very typical of many Christian writings, Muhammad is like an anti-saint figure, precisely someone you should not follow to live a good and Christian.
Is it accurate, the way you're portraying it, which again comports with my understanding of the situation of Spain or the Spains? So we don't offend any Portuguese people here, because when you say Spain, of course, that's anachronistic because it was the Spains, and Portugal is one of the oldest aspects of the Spains that became Portugal. So I only say that because a lot of people always get offended, but it's almost, I think, is this a fair rendition, what I'm going to say, that most, from the time of Rodrigo, the people living there, they understood the Moors and they saw them as enemies, as hostile enemies. But a lot of the people didn't understand the ideological or religious underpinning behind the religion. Obviously, most Europeans, they just saw them as heathens or heretics or Gentiles, whatever the word. They didn't really understand a lot about Islam. So it almost sounds like Rodrigo wanted to show his fellow countrymen, Christians, kind of like, no, these people are actually motivated by their teacher, their prophet, and his law, as he calls it, the Sharia. And he wants to show them that this is, it's almost like it's an existential struggle. It's not just a hostile race or people that we're fighting over territory for. There's more to it than that. Is that a fair rendering?
Yeah, I just start actually just with a minor point that the Latin word lex, which gets used, which literally translates as law. I mean, he used that to refer to Muhammad's religion, but that's actually a pretty standard term in Latin to describe medieval Latin to describe a religious system. Just as a minor point there. I would say that he does say very clearly, says that the people who followed Muhammad, who imbibed his law, that they are hostile to the law of life and discipline, which referring to Christianity, the law of life and discipline. And he does, see as that, that there's an ideological motivation of hostility to Christianity. One of the other key aspects of his career, of course, is that he actually commissioned Mark of Toledo to translate the Quran into Latin directly from Arabic. And that's actually quite a significant step in, European scholarship on Islam, because that Latin translation was actually the first real literal translation that stuck closely to the text. But the reason Rodrigo commissioned it was not because he wanted to, promote some kind of interfaith understanding of Islam. His actual point was to refute Islam. That he felt aggrieved by, according to Mark, he felt aggrieved by what he saw as, the attack, the way that many former churches have been converted into mosques, by the attacks by Muslims on Christian territory, and that he wanted to refute the of Islam. Yeah, so he did understand.
We'll continue that train of thought. I just want to comment on something important that you said, which is that he wasn't writing this to foster interfaith relations. This was almost being written as, we need to more along the idea of know your enemy, like Sun Tzu. So he's trying to expose how they think, their law, et cetera, et cetera. And why that to me is interesting is because it's not really just limited to him. If you actually look at the whole field of Orientalism came into being, all of these early European scholars who devoted themselves to studying, especially Islam and Arabic. It originally started out like that. It wasn't because, we want to understand. And they even lie, for example, all the way up to Thomas Jefferson. They claim his Quran that he had, which I've seen. And when I used to work at the Library of Congress, they always present it as, you see what an enlightened man he was. He wanted to understand Islam for its own sake, and he was impressed with it. Even he got it in the context, I believe, of the Barbary pirates and the Barbary War, and he was trying to understand the role of Islam. And because when he met the ambassador of Tripoli, I believe, and he said, "Why are you attacking us?" And the ambassador basically said, "Because our Quran says X, Y, and Z." So I think I just think this is interesting that people like the Archbishop that you translated, and even before him, but a little bit, I think maybe, and all the way on up until just recently, when they studied Islam, it wasn't out of out of admiration. It was more out of the need to understand this particular civilization, which had posed a great challenge, to put it mildly, to Western civilization. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that he's broadly hostile to Islam, and he sees it as in a struggle with Christianity. I would add a couple of points, though, that Rodrigo, from the way he writes about Islam, I don't think he understands it. I mean, in contrast to some other Christian writers at the time, I don't think he understood it as a Christian heresy, but he saw it as its own separate development that takes stuff from Christianity. But it's not. It doesn't see it quite as a heresy, because he does use and for example, Arian Christianity and some of his other minor history, the form of Christianity that posited the Son of God as lesser than the Father. But he's saying, I think he sees Islam as this more of a separate thing, but still a form of what you could call in medieval Latin perfidia. In the same way he speaks of Judaism as a perfidia. However, he does, I say, in contrast to Judaism, he actually does see, a struggle with, does see a struggle between Christianity and Islam in the Iberian Peninsula. And I think actually it's fair to say that in terms of his outlook, he was, I think, ultimately hoping that Muslim sovereignty in Iberia would be ended. But he also, if you look at the prologue to the Historia Arabum, he quite triumphantly says that just as the Muslims oppressed the Christians, or the Arabs oppressed the Christians from the beginning by making them pay tribute as dhimmi, i.e., he's referring to the dhimmi status. Now the Arabs living under Christian rule live in servitude and pay tribute. So this is actually what key point I make actually about how does Rodrigo understand the nature of the relationship should be between Christians and Muslims. He doesn't think that necessarily outright that Muslims should all be wiped out, but he does very clearly postulate that, you know, if Muslims are going to stay in the Iberian Peninsula, that they live in the way that Christians were living under Muslim rule. That the Muslims now become the dhimmi and pay the tribute to the Christian rulers, you know, and acknowledge the Christian rulers' supremacy. So it's like that's why I call it reverse dhimmitude. I know dhimmitude is kind of controversial in academia because people say, oh, no, it's Islamophobic and this kind of thing. But actually, I was able to incorporate that into.
Yeah, that's a good concept. So would you say that, you know, he was recommending that as a sort of payback, like, okay, you guys put us through this for all these centuries, now it's payback? Or was it more like, yeah, this is how to go, okay? If we're going to be the lords over you, then you need to pay tribute. In other words, was he accepting it as a good system that works for whoever's dominance over the subculture, you know, the challenger? Or was he basically saying, yeah, now get a bit of your own medicine? I'm going to assume it's the former.
You know what? Actually, when you said payback, I thought, yeah, that's exactly right. Because if you look at the introduction to the Historia Arabum, he says that after the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, he says that the blunting of the Arab sword and the restoration of Gothic strength, referring to the strength of the Christian kingdoms, have opened up ways for the Christians to retaliate. So it's a retaliation that, you know, you put the Christians under status, so now we'll put you. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah. But now, before you go too far, so yeah, what you just gave us, I think, is a good introduction to the man and his times. And I think we should talk a little more at some point when we get there about how he was actually a crusader himself in the context of the Reconquista, and how he stood side by side. I remember he was at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, standing side by side with the Castilian king Alfonso VIII, because I know I have a few quotes from him in my book, In Sordid Scimitar. So we'll get to that, but let's now that we've gotten an idea of the man and the times and so forth, and you told us a little bit about, you know, his rendering of early history of Spain. So what is his history of the Islamic invasion of Spain, which I'm pretty sure is in 711. I assume he also agrees that's the date. And so, you know, let's start from there with the Islamic invasion of Spain. And how does he describe it? How did it happen? Does it accord with the, you know, the Muslim historiography about who's it, Zayd ibn al-Tariq, who, you know, came with I think the main guy was Musa something, you know? Maybe he doesn't know the names, I'm sure, but does it comport in general with that? So yeah, let's start. Tell me about how he describes the 8th century Islamic conquest of Spain, and does he talk about what was the battle? Does he, you know, I'm sure he does, but what was the pivotal Guadalete, the battle of which I think is in 711, where King Roderick dies? So yeah, give me that early invasion.
Battle of Guadalete.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So the main actually narrative he supplies about the Islamic conquest of Spain isn't actually in the Historia Arabum. The main narrative actually is in the Gothic. If you look at the material, actually, it looks like he's actually also using probably some material that comes from Arabic sources. Why? because if you look at the dating system, for example, that occurs within the conquest narrative, he actually has Islamic months. He uses Islamic months like Ramadan, Rajab, and he gives the corresponding Hijri calendar year. And that isn't actually in other sources, comparable Latin sources about the talk about the Muslim conquest. So there is clearly some, I think, Arabic source material he's using. So, for example, also when he talks about the Muslim conquerors in some towns using Jews as garrison troops, that actually occurs in an Arabic source, the Akhbar Majmu'a fi Fath al-Andalus. So there's that, but also he has some of these other he has other material that corresponds to Christian sources to although because both in Christian and Islamic sources, like the story of Count Julian and his reputed betrayal of King Roderick as a revenge against Roderick.
Did you hear me? I said, go ahead, tell us the recount of the story of
about Count Julian. Yeah,
I think
I would say this: the story of Count Julian doesn't occur in our earliest sources, the ones from the 8th century, like the Mozarabic Chronicles. So there are reasons to doubt it. But the story of Count Julian is that he was one of the noblemen in Visigothic Spain. Some say that he was ruling a Visigothic outpost in what is now Morocco, around Ceuta, and that his daughter was subject to some sexual violence by King Roderick. And so, in revenge for that, Count Julian conspired with Musa bin Nusayr, the leading Muslim general who led the conquest of Spain, and Tariq bin Ziyad. He conspired with them and helped them enter Spain and conduct raids and helped them in the battle. And Rodrigo's account, he actually has Julian play a role in the battle.
I think your internet connection, everyone, I don't think you know, I don't know if I said it, but Ayman's in Syria, northern Syria. So I think we're having technical difficulties again. Bear with us. So until he comes back, I think this is really fascinating and important stuff. This Archbishop Rodrigo, like I said, I came across him many times and I've read and quoted him. And what we're talking about is this Count Julian is, as he said, if you were able to hear it, yeah, it looks like he dropped out. Maybe he'll come back. He was like disgruntled nobleman, and he's coming back. He was a disgruntled nobleman whose daughter was apparently taken advantage of by the king, Roderick. And so he conspired with the Arabs and brought them back and helped them come into Spain. And let me add him here. Are you there, Ayman? Can you hear us? Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Your video was slowing down, and anyway, I was just summarizing what you had said. So let's move on from Roderick and Count Julian, and just tell us of the. Okay, so one of the things that I often hear, and I myself have tried to counter, and I have through the sources, and it might have even been through the Archbishop, but I know of other sources, early sources, is this idea that the Arab invasion of Spain was relatively innocuous, and that somehow the Gothic peoples just they didn't care, so they more because the implication is the Arab rule was seen as lenient, so they were just as fine submitting to the Arab invaders as they were to the Visigoths, the Western Goths. But I myself, and I've quoted many sources talking about them fighting pretty savagely, being burned in their churches alive because they wouldn't relent. So it does seem to me like it was a standard violent invasion and conquest, and that the people, the Christians of Spain, did fight back pretty severely. So what is the sense that you get from Rodrigo's translation?
Yeah, Rodrigo actually he sees the Muslim conquest of Spain as like a punishment from God actually that came because of the Visigoths' deviance from the true faith, and the spread of corruption within Visigothic Spain, beginning with King Witiza, who ruled not long before the Muslims came. So that is actually, he doesn't portray the Muslim conquest as something benign. No, it's a divine. It's almost like a divine punishment from Rodrigo's perspective. And that's that was a very similar view to previous Christian writings. Of course, you also probably know the Mozarabic Chronicles description of the conquest of Spain, and he compares it like the destruction of Babylon, and destruction routed on Rome and Jerusalem. And actually, Rodrigo copies that actually within his narrative too. And yeah, actually, I just do want to say that the Muslim conquest of Spain was not some kind of peaceful affair. It was actually, as you quite rightly note, it was a military invasion. I actually do want to tell you that there is actually within some of the within the last century or so, there was some kind of revisionist scholarship that was trying to say that the military conquest of Spain never happened, or like somehow the people in the Iberian Peninsula just Islamized and Arabized. I mean, that's complete rubbish. Yeah, that's a complete fraud, because all the earliest material we have very clearly attests from multiple sources from different places, whether it's the Liber Pontificalis or whether it's the writings of Bede, the Mozarabic Chronicle, all very clearly shows that there was a military conquest here, and this was not some benign affair.
Okay, yeah, good. Okay, how about can you tell us a little bit about and it's good that you're even though this is about your particular translation of Rodrigo, by all means, I like the fact that you're comparing and contrasting it with other early sources, Latin and Arabic as well. So keep doing that, because it gives us a more holistic picture, even though we're focused on Rodrigo, of course. So during the conquest, and I'm glad to hear you're agreeing with and I know exactly the school of thought that you're referring to, because that's what I was referring to. That it just everyone was so happy to get it was like, oh yeah, okay, sure, we'll submit to you guys, it's fine. So to that end, why don't you tell us about what sort of atrocities did the Arabs commit during this these early decades from 711 until whenever it's really consolidated, which was very quick. I know that.
Yeah, I mean that there are stories about Christians being besieged inside the church. There's stories of military battles. To be fair, that there are not too many descriptions of these in Rodrigo's narrative, but you do see it plenty in Arabic sources. And you see in the Mozarabic Chronicle that it was vicious and violent, with executions.
Isn't that interesting, by the way?
And with in some.
Isn't it interesting though what you just said? Because this is a point I've made before, which is oftentimes from a historical point of view, when we read about Islam and Christendom and all those battles, it's oftentimes the Muslim sources that emphasize the atrocities, but in a way that they're actually trying to boast, kind of like, we laid low the infidel. Actually, I found that if I come across more unflattering, savage atrocities written by the Arabs of what their people did to, let's say, the Christians, than vice versa, even though, of course, the Christians confirm it, but they don't necessarily get into the lurid details the way the Arabs do, which I find ironic. And this actually goes all the way up to, it's not just the Arabs, the Turkish historians of Alp Arslan, okay, of Battle of Manzikert fame, for example. Western historians, going back to early Christian sources, tend to present him as magnanimous. He treated, the king Diogenes Romanus, I believe is the name, very magnanimously. But if you read the Turkish sources, he slaps him around, spits at him, yanks his hair, throws him on the ground, calls him a dog, and so I just find it funny, because I believe Islamic sources include really bad, behavior, if you will, but in a way because they think that exalts the religion against the infidel.
Yeah, if you've last year, I published with Routledge, another academic publisher, a translation and study of an Arabic source on the conquest of Spain, the Fath al-Andalus. It's thought to be thought to be anonymous and dates to the 12th, probably dates to the beginning of the 12th century. I translated it and wrote a study on it as a kind of a almost to give a reader an introductory feel to how Arabic writing about the conquest. And yeah, it does very much glorify the notion of holy war and jihad, and it goes into detail about beheadings, goes into detail about God striking terror into the heart of the infidels. So it very much glorifies holy war. I said that in the introduction to Fath al-Andalus. I said that is actually one of the central themes of this book. It's about jihad as holy war against infidels. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Okay,
Another thing I actually say,
go ahead.
Yeah. No, I said the other thing I actually did want to emphasize, we have an overlap, is emphasis on the amount of plunder that was taken. Some of it is legendary, like the story of Solomon's Table, but all the sources do concord that a lot of money of wealth was extracted and taken back to the center of the Umayyad Caliphate in Syria. And that's that's classic imperialism, as it were, extracting the conquered territory, taking it to power.
Yeah. How about slavery? Now, I know there was a lot of slavery, which is interesting, and because of course a lot of people like to argue that from a theological point of view, Muslims are not to enslave Christians because they're people of the book, they're dhimmis. So how could they be enslaved? Some people, of course, make this apologetic. But as you and I know, of course, lots of Christians, especially everyone, men, women, and children, were enslaved and sold on the slave markets, especially in Cordoba. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So actually, both Rodrigo's writings and also Arabic sources do actually talk about enslavement of Christians during the conquest. Because actually, it's true that it is true that someone who is a Christian who makes a dhimma pact with the Muslims and becomes a dhimmi, it is true that you cannot, in Islamic law, you can't enslave that person. But if the Christian doesn't have a dhimmi pact, it is actually deemed legal to enslave. And the Fath al-Andalus, this book I mentioned also that I translated, that very clearly talks about the likes of the cap that were taken from Spain, the likes of this had not been seen before. And Rodrigo also mentions about thousands of Christian captives being taken from Spain back to the center of Umayyad power in Syria. So that is amply attested as well. I actually do want to add one other thing, which is that before the conquest of Spain, there was the conquest of Berber North Africa, and Fath al-Andalus also talks about captives being taken for enslavement from the Berbers against whom the Muslims waged jihad initially.
Yeah. I think that's one of the underlooked things that people miss is the mass slavery. I think in one of my books I have some quotes about how Tariq and Musa, when they went back to the Umayyad Caliphate, they were leading tens of thousands of slaves to give as gifts to the Umayyad Caliph there. So slavery was definitely a huge thing, and there was also this thing about it's one king. In fact, that's supposedly how maybe I don't know if this is how the Reconquista starts in the very, very early centuries, which are shrouded in mystery. But like in the 8th century, supposedly from Pelayo and his descendants. But apparently, some Christian king had to gift 100 of the most beautiful Christian maidens, to the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain in the 8th century. Did you come across that at all, especially in Rodrigo's writings?
So there's one of the when he's talking about the lines of Asturian kings that begin with Pelagius, or Pelayo is known as in Spanish. He does actually mention one of the kings having a deal with the Saracens to gift a set number of girls every year to the Saracens. That's not actually original to Rodrigo, though. That's actually coming from earlier Iberian Christian historiography. But to be fair, that's kind of an exceptional detail in terms of describing the reigns of various Christian kings. I probably don't think that was happening most of the time, but in this case, apparently the king who struck that deal, he wanted it as kind of like as part of a peace treaty with the Saracens. Yeah.
And for the audience, so they understand what we're talking about. So Islam invades, the Arabs invade in 711, and they conquer the Spains. But of course, in the north, especially in the northwest quadrant, in the mountains, the Asturias, that's where the Reconquista starts. And according to the tradition, just a few rebels, including Pelayo, actually have a hold up there. Yeah, they're up there, and it's from them, who never get conquered, that all these kingdoms, Castile and Leon and all the rest come out, the northern kingdoms, and it's through them that the Reconquista starts southwards. But we're still in the 8th century, so this is still not even begun yet. And what you were saying, basically, so everyone understands, is that the Christians who were conquered or who submitted in the south, they were technically exempt from being enslaved, whereas the ones in the north who still remained free were, of course, free game, because they're the enemies of the Jihad. So let's talk a little bit about one of the worst guys that I came across, and let's see if if Rodrigo mentions him, was Al-Mansur.
Yes, he does talk about it. Al-Mansur. Yes, he does. Yeah.
Tell us about him.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting because he in the Historia Gothica, of course, he's drawing on Christian historiography, prior Christian historiography about Al-Mansur, and But in the Historia Arabum, he gives like this general in the history of the Arabs that he wrote. He gives this more general overview of Al-Mansur and how he specifically related to the Umayyad Caliph Hisham II. So basically, he emphasizes how Al-Mansur became the real ruler of the Umayyad Caliphate, while Hisham II was being shut up in his palace the whole time. But he does emphasize also that Al-Mansur, he launched many raids against expeditions against Christian territory. I think he gives a total of 52 times, actually. Mm-hmm. So, and he actually relates an anecdote about how on one occasion Al-Mansur was besieged by the Christians, but then he got to work plowing his own fields in the territory he was encircled in. He managed to hold out the Christian siege. That's actually clearly taken from Arabic sources, but he actually he does. He does speak of Al-Mansur as he clearly. Shows. As a character, of course, because he's attacking Christian territory, but he respects Al-Mansur as a skill as a military general, and he contrasts it with his successor, actually, Abdul Malik, who was put to flight from Leon by the Christians. So it's an interesting picture. So he takes, yeah.
Yeah, I know there's a delay between us. I was going to say, Al-Mansur also, for those who don't know, is Arabic. It's not even his real name. It's an epithet. It's Arabic for the victorious one, because I believe he never lost a battle. Those 50-plus invasions and ravages of the northern Spain of the Christian kingdoms. We have a couple of questions. Let's put them on here, Eamon, and see. So here's Lies Destroy Lives saying, will Eamon's translation of Jihad and Reconquista be available on Kindle? Hard copies of these kinds of books are usually very expensive.
Okay, yeah, just to be clear, the title of the book is Rodrigo Jimenez de Rada's Minor Histories, but you can buy, there will be an ebook of it available on the Manchester University Press website. If you also want a copy of Feth el-Andalus, The Conquest of El-Andalus, that Arabic source I translated, there is also an ebook of that available from Routledge, and they are cheaper than the hard copies, I can assure you.
How much are the hard copies?
How much are the hard copies? Well, I think the Rowledge one goes to around $140, while this Rodrigo one is around $130. I mean, I wish
Why
this
did
were
he
not
do
actually
that?
the case. I do.
Why did he?
I
Like,
wish these books.
do they not want people to read books? I mean, I don't get it.
I mean, I think their expectation is that they think that, well, yeah, medieval history must be a niche thing, and the public in general is not interested in it. So let's make these expensive universities buy copies of these books, and so and so then they expect to make that makes up for the profit margin issue. Yeah.
Lies destroy lives again. Super important stuff. This is the kind of interview I'd like to share. Please consider doing the interview again with a better internet connection. Yeah, duly noted.
I promise you, I will try to
And
get a better internet connection because I actually I like being on Raymond's show because Raymond's interested in medieval history like me. So yeah.
yeah, we'll do it again. It looks like the Spanish
Yeah.
starting copying some of Islam's violent ways. Islam seems to infect everything. That's actually a theory I myself have had, and I've actually fleshed it out in some of the books, which is that the reason that, for example, when you look at the conquistadors in America and the supposedly really horrific stuff they did, and I say supposedly not because I'm trying to deny it, but I'm not that well versed in what they did. I just hear that they really were extra bad compared to most other Europeans would have been to the natives. Anyway, I always thought that's because Spain had gone through this sort of crucible with Islam for centuries, that they were just forged into these extremely militant fighters, so that once the Islam threat was gone, or once they went somewhere else, like to the Americas, anyone who's an enemy or an infidel was treated savagely because that's how the Spaniards or the people of the Spains, including the Portuguese, had to be in order to exist with Islam as a neighbor. So it kind of carried on for a little bit. I think that might have happened, including when people talk about how savage and fierce the Inquisition was, which was really central to Spain, especially early on. Well, I mean, as we know, the Inquisition was something that the Almoravids and the Almohads, Al-Muwahideen, actually did before. So they could have learned it as well. So that's a good comment. And then feel free to respond or elaborate, Eamon.
Yeah, so actually, this is actually one of the few moments I think I'll take a slight disagreement there because, to me, I mean, firstly, I would say that in terms of the conquistadors in America, they don't strike me as say necessarily more evil than say other European peoples who went over there. Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, it's very much. One of the other things that you look at in say Rodrigo's histories, for example, is that he doesn't just talk about Muslims versus the Christians. He does also talk about the intra-Christian fighting that happened between various kingdoms during that period. And, it's not. I mean, it's also some pretty savage stuff. But I mean, that just strikes me as more kind of in keeping with medieval times. That rather than any particular dynamic there. The issue, of course, today is that you do have Muslims today who look to medieval times and to medieval jihad as a model for today. Whereas, but I think that's more of the issue. I think it's a more generalized, brutality. I think rather than necessarily, I think something like Muslim specific. But yeah, it is true that as I did mention, that the reverse dimitude that Rodrigo accepts as a way of dealing with Muslims in Iberia, that's directly influenced by the dhimmi model that the Muslims imposed on Christians in Iberia. So yeah, I'll leave it at that there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. So we're in the 8th century, or actually, I think Al-Mansur is the early 9th. I don't know, maybe. And I think he's the one that also.
He's 10th century.
And I think he's the one that also steals the bells of Santiago and takes them back, or during one of his raids. Maybe we'll get to that because it comes back many centuries later. But okay, so all right, what else? So we've kind of covered and seen, before we pass by, because I'm pretty sure, if I recall, Rodrigo actually talks a little bit about. Tell us first about the Battle of Toulouse, which is not as popular as the Battle of Tours, and I think both of them are in Rodrigo's history. So tell us the significance of the first one, and also whatever if there's anything special that he shares about the Battle of Tours, since that's really famous and popular, especially in the Western reckoning. Are you there?
Actually, talk about the siege of Toulouse during 721 by the governor of Al-Andalus, beyond just Spain, going into France there in the siege of Toulouse. And then the Frankish army, or he calls the army the Franks, under Duke Eudo of Aquitaine, come and defeat the Muslims. And Semeh bin Malik is killed. To be sure, there, Rodrigo's information actually mostly comes from the Mozarabic Chronicles. He's taking that directly from the Mozarabic Chronicle. However,
why don't you tell us? Yeah, this is the problem. You know, he's in Syria, so as you can imagine, the connections are not that great. Are you there? Why don't you tell us about the Mozarabic? Tell us about the Mozarabic Chronicle.
Yeah, the Chronicle. Yeah. Yes, the Mozarabic Chronicle is interesting because it's basically the only source we have that is a continuous documentation of both the conquest and the first 40 years or so under Umayyad, because Mozarabic was a term that was used in scholarship to refer to Iberian Christians living under Muslim rule in Spain. And why Mozarabic? From the Arabic Mustarab, which means someone Arabized, because many of the Christians who did live under Muslim rule in Spain did end up adopting Arabic language and culture, but without converting to Islam, to form their own demographic, actually. So by Rodrigo's time in Toledo, for example, you had a Mozarabic community in Toledo. So Catholics, like the other like Rodrigo and who was from Navarra originally, but having Arabic, having knowledge of Arabic, and of course, I think Mark of Toledo, whom Rodrigo commissioned to translate the Quran into Latin, was probably a Mozarab in that regard. But yeah, the Mozarabic Chronicle is interesting because it is actually the only contemporary source we have for these the initial conquest and the Can you hear me? Yeah. Am I back?
You're freezing up, and your voice is and the voice is going away.
Was I cut off from?
Yeah, and your picture is right now frozen. Maybe if you want to step out and come back again. Anyway, there it is, folks. As you can see, this is interesting stuff. This is the kind of thing that I really enjoy, which is why I had Eamon come talk to me about his very expensive book. But hey, you'll get if you want to get an electronic copy, I'm sure you can do that. That's great. But yeah, I wonder if we can just do audio. Let me look at some of your comments here. Oh boy, there's a lot. I'm glad you all joined us. That would be good. Good evening. Good morning, Raymond. Hey, hi. Hello to all of you. Will not wait. Al Zut. Can't escape the Zut. More comments about the beardless look, huh? Yeah, I don't know if you know, I shaved. If you haven't seen this, the stream I did, long story, you can check it out. But I've decided to make the beard great again. So you can see there's some stubbles coming back. This is only like 5 days, so it comes back quick and fierce and with a vengeance. So sit back and watch, and before long, it'll be back. I think Eamon's here, so let's get him back on. Are you there, Eamon? Unmute yourself.
Hello.
Or okay.
Yeah.
All right. So
Yeah.
good. So let's. All right. So we're talking. Yeah, we were talking about. And I know I don't. I'll already answer for you. I think the Battle of Tours in Rodrigo is very short. It's very brief and doesn't add anything special to what we know. So we can, I think, move on from all that. And so tell us about the really pivotal thing, that what I find fascinating about this guy, the Archbishop Rodrigo, is first of all, he's the Archbishop. He's a clergyman. He's a theologian too, as well, and a historian, of course, as we saw. And he wrote basically one of the earliest biographies that was read in Europe at the time. But at the same time, he was almost like a warrior, because I know he stood to, as I was saying, I'm pretty sure, unless my memory's foggy, but I think he was at the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212. And this is the pivotal decisive battle between the Christian North and the Islamic South. And this is where the Christians win. It's my book, Sword and Scimitar, which is about the most decisive battles. It's one of them. It's its own chapter, I think chapter 6. Anyway, he stands side by side with the head king, who was in charge of the Christian forces, Alfonso VIII. And I know they have an exchange. Too bad I don't have my book here. I could quote it, but where Alfonso expresses some sort of despair, and the Archbishop tells him, he gives him courage to fight on, and he's next to him armed as well. And also he continues on, this Archbishop, the grandson of Alfonso VIII, Fernando the Third, who really is kind of caps off or finalizes the Reconquista. I mean, I know the Muslims are still in Granada mostly until 1492, Elizabeth and Ferdinand, the other Ferdinand. But it's largely seen that under the reign of Ferdinand III, that mostly all of the victory of 1212 culminates with his efforts, and he captures many other cities. I know Seville's one of the big ones that he captures. So and the Archbishop was I believe, tutor of Ferdinand. So he was side by side with his grandfather fighting along, and he was also the tutor and of Ferdinand III. And I believe he died during the siege of Seville, when Ferdinand put it to siege, and it was a very fierce siege, but he finally overcame and conquered it. But I think he got a letter that this Archbishop had died at that point, and he was very distraught, if I recall, from my chapter of Ferdinand in Defenders of the West. So comment a little bit about, his role with both these kings, and in between, of course, and, how he was influential, and what did that, for example, did his knowledge of Islam, did that sort of color how they saw these particular kings? Because it doesn't, a lot of times in these kings, it's not, of course they're fighting the Moors because they're enemies, but others seem to have a more keener insight onto what's going in the Islamic aspect. And they even talk about, I think in some of the chronicles that talk about Ferdinand III reconquering mosques that were originally churches, and cleansing them of the filth of Muhammad with holy water. That's an exact quote, and so forth. So anyway, tell us a bit about what you think of that era with those kings who were pivotal to the Reconquista. Oh, okay. Are you there? It's just me again. Let me look at some of your some more comments. Pray the people. Yeah. At least do an intro while your special guest is trying to connect. Good point. That was way back when we couldn't even connect, huh? But I wasn't ready to do any intro, so you see, I had to wait for him, because I just expected him to be rapping, and look at that. He leaves me hanging. See, that's what happens when you live in Syria. or he's in Syria. I don't think he lives there, but he's, I think, doing special research for his translation works. Okay, I think I see him in the backstage. There he
All
is.
right. Hello.
Yeah. So did you hear my
Okay.
question? Did you hear it?
No, what was the question actually? Just say in brief.
I'll summarize it. Basically, I said what's also pivotal about Archbishop Rodrigo isn't just his writings, but the time that he lived, because he lived at a time between Alfonso VIII of Castile and his grandson Ferdinand III, which is really a high time, a watershed time for the Reconquista, because the first one, Alfonso, he's the head king of the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa, which is the most decisive battle where the Christians win. And I also mentioned how he stood side by side with him, Rodrigo, and inspired him. And he was also a tutor of his grandson, who also became the king, and who's featured in my book. That's how important he is to these battles, and that's Ferdinand III. And I talked a little bit about how Ferdinand conquered. He's the one that really culminates the victories of Las Navas de Tolosa several decades later when he's older, and including by conquering Seville. And that's when he learns that Archbishop Rodrigo dies, actually, and he was pretty depressed about that. So I just wanted you to comment about, the importance that he really lived in a pretty pivotal time as well, and he participated in a lot of these very important events, including battles against the Moors. So I wanted to see if you can comment on that, not just his intellectual life, but sort of, his participation in these really decisive events.
Yeah, so in relation to the Las Navas de Tolosa in 1212, his account, Rodrigo's account of it, is actually one of our primary sources for it, because he was in the battle, and he actually talks, he goes into considerable detail about it, such that, much of the 8th book of the Historia Gothica, or Gothic history, actually is about the battle. And how he made preparations for it, how he managed things in Toledo as the Crusaders got ready to go on the march, about the initial engagements and the disagreement that arose with the Ultramontani, or people beyond the Pyrenees Mountains, many of whom actually went left before the battle in Las Navas de Tolosa actually took place. And he talks about being in the rear guard with Alfonso VIII. At one point he quotes Alfonso as saying, "Let us die here, Archbishop, for such a death is not unbefitting at such a moment." And Rodrigo replied, "If it pleases God, the crown of victory presses on, not death. But if God decides otherwise, we are all ready to die with you." And in the Historia Arabum, he talks about, he makes the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa as the decisive turning point of the blunting of the Arab sword and the restoration of the Gothic strength, or the Strenuitas Gothorum, which is the idea that the Christian leaders of Spain embody continuity with the Visigoths of old in terms of military strength and boldness. So there's that, and then also Rodrigo, as I mentioned, he led a military campaign after Ferdinand became king of Castile and Leon, a unified Castile and Leon. He led a campaign against a Muslim fort called Casayata. Rodrigo led that himself and took that as his own possession on behalf of the Church of Toledo. By the time of Rodrigo's death in 1247, you basically have had the shift now from decisively in favor of the Christian kingdoms in Spain, where they're the preeminent power, while the Muslim sovereignty is reduced pretty much entirely to the Emirate of Granada in southern Spain, which was subservient to basically was like a client state for a long time of the Kingdom of Castile. So, Rodrigo really does live in that transition period that shifts decisively in favor of the Christians.
So, as the way you describe him, and as I did too, and as he was, I mean, he was basically essentially a crusader, and you even pointed out he led essentially a crusade. Was that normal? Was that typical? I mean, I think I do know the answer, but was it typical for a Christian theologian to also be to be not just preaching the crusade, but actually fighting in it, because obviously, if you say yes, as I think you will, I'm just now I'm trying to bridge with the modern era, kind of like, because so many people today, to be a Christian means you completely disavow any forms of violence. So I just find it interesting that this man, he's not just a Christian, he is the archbishop, okay, which is pretty high up there. And here he is being a crusader, going to war, fighting, killing, presumably, the infidel. So I mean, I think I already know the answer, but let's get your take on it.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is, I mean, to be sure, Rodrigo doesn't describe himself, in his book wielding a sword necessarily. But yeah, I mean, the bishops are there, to actually give morale to the fighters and to administer sacraments. And he's not the only bishop actually who was involved in that battle actually, because he also mentions, for example, the Bishop of Narbonne in southern France actually had come to participate in that crusade that led to culminated in the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa. So yeah, it's not actually, and it's not in fact unusual in that time for Christian clergymen to be taking this active militant role in encouraging crusades and actually helping to participate in the campaign. Even if they've not necessarily got a sword on their hands, they're still helping actively to help facilitate the war effort. So it's a very this is an important aspect of Rodrigo's career. It's a big contrast with, say, Christian bishops today.
Right. All right. Let me take another one here. Lies destroy lives. Raymond, please consider interviewing Mark Dury about his book, The Third Choice, Islam, Dhimitude, and Freedom. It's not a big book, very easy to read, and super insightful. Okay. Thanks for the advice or the recommendation. Okay, so
please, I encourage readers to get. They've got questions about Rodrigo or about his works. Yeah, please do.
Get which book? The one that we just the Mark
My
one?
History is Arabs. Yeah,
for a long time. I'm pretty sure it's in my collection. I'm pretty sure I read it too, actually, but I know it's maybe like 15 years ago. Yeah, it's a small book, short book, but to the point. Okay, so where now, and what's the last date that he what's the last event that he writes about? Does he keep extending this history until he dies, or what?
Right. So the history of the Arabs, as I mentioned, is really the last one of his series in his History of Spain project. His history of his Gothic history, the first main book, which is by far the largest one, he probably started writing it in the 1230s, and he continues it through up to the conquest of Cordoba, which is the last main event in the narrative. It's right at the end, the Christian conquest of Cordoba in 1236. And it was very important for Rodrigo, although he did not participate in it himself. But it was led by King Ferdinand III, so he calls it a very special place and says, on the when he talks about the conversion of the mosque back into a cathedral, it says, on that day the filth of Muhammad was purged from the patrician city, because Cordoba had an important status as a city in Spain back to Roman times. So. He actually mentions at the very, very end of the Gothic history that he'd done his final redaction of in 1243. History of the Arabs actually looks to be the last one, probably separated by around 2 years or so from the final redaction of the Historia Gothica. But he intends it to be like the last installment, because the way Rodrigo conceived of Spain's history, he basically said that Spain was subject to a series of calamities from its earliest history, and subject to ravages and by various peoples, and including the Romans, for example. He says, I hope the Arabs' ravages should be the last, because nothing was unattempted by them in the Spanish lands. And his basic view is that, okay, right now Spain is now in a better position with the shift is now in a better position than it's been in a long time, and is recovering from these calamities of the past. But as he also does warn in the prologue to the History of the Romans, says, disasters could happen again if Christian leaders don't, engage in corruption and don't follow the way, don't follow the right way. So it's like a tentative optimism he has. But yeah, his view is that the Arabs' role contribution overall to Spain was the last of a series of ravages that Spain had been subject to from its earliest history.
So tell me, okay, so is there any inkling in his writings about a golden age under Islam?
No, no.
Covers that
No.
period, and I think the golden age is supposedly the Umayyad Caliphate in like the 800s sometime. Is that it? So I know he covers that
Yeah.
era.
The Umayyad Caliphate's announced in the 900s, yeah, but there's the Umayyad Emirate that precedes it, yeah. No, he doesn't see it as a golden age. What I would say, though, is that because he's drawing on what I did in the later sections of Historia Arabica, because he's drawing on Arabic source materials, so he talks about some of these rulers, about how they ruled their own people, the Muslims, say. He does say, for example, this ruler, he applied justice to his people, or this person, he went and this emir, he kept the criminals and delinquents in check. This one was wise, and so on and so forth. So there are some positive comments about Muslim rulers, some of these Muslim rulers, in terms of their personal qualities. But I mean, again, that's not because of it's like a benign interfaithing. It's just he still sees them as in opposition to Christendom and sees a conflict between the two. In the same way as I did mention to you, he admires Al-Mansur as a general and respects him as a general, but doesn't mean he thinks Al-Mansur is a benign figure. Some actually people did try to suppose that because there are some positive comments about some of the Muslim rulers, that it shows that he has a tolerance or a special tolerance towards Muslims. I would say actually the more accurate view is, if you look at the prologue, it's like a reverse dimitude relationship that he actually envisions with Muslims. Yeah, he can accept their presence in Spain as dhimmis to Christians, but he doesn't accept Muslim sovereignty in Iberia by any means.
Okay. And before we finalize this issue about the Golden Age, does he in any way, shape, or form talk about? And I get what you said, but talk about Islamic Spain or the Moorish or southern Spain as being in any way, shape, or form more advanced or enlightened or anything like that?
No. He doesn't talk about anything like that. No.
Because I know what you mean. He's objective. He's objective enough to praise a particular Muslim ruler, and I see that a lot in the writings of Christians. So if there was an actual time where it was southern Spain was a little more civilized, I would think he's the kind of guy that would say that because it's just true. But you're saying he doesn't say anything like that?
I didn't say anything like that. Again, it's really about, say, praising a particular ruler, making a positive comment about a ruler's policies. But that's in an individual level, but not like that. Muslim Spain was more advanced and enlightened and civilized than Christian Spain. Really, I think what he's probably doing there is, firstly, again, he's taking from Arabic source materials about some of these rulers. But also more generally, if you look at the prologue in the Historia Gothica, he does say that, one of the reasons for writing history is to look at examples of good conduct by rulers and bad conduct so people can learn from those examples. So I think that's really what's at play here, but not no golden age of Islamic Spain. No.
Okay, well. Since you've gone through a lot of these early manuscripts, do any of them talk about? Let's stick with the Christian ones for now, because most people don't realize that the Golden Age thing is, I don't know, is it 19th century or even 20th century historians came up with it. It really has no backing anywhere. I don't even think that's why I'm asking you. Do Muslim sources talk about it? Of course, they talk about it as being wealthy and powerful compared to the infidel, and that's expected. But that's not what Westerners mean by Golden Age. They mean this time of where Jews and Christians and Muslims lived in harmony. And I would imagine what that means is, as long as they were dhimmis and paying jizya and living the way they had to live, they were not necessarily killed, even though, as I've pointed out, because I think the Golden Age is always associated with Abdul Rahman III, or one of the Rahmans, but it was, I think, during his reign, or maybe one of his. It was very close to his time, if not him. Where I think it is actually him, where the martyrs of Cordoba, isn't that when it happens around that time?
Yeah.
200s?
Martyrs of Cordoba affair takes place during the mid 9th century, so that's the rules of Abdurrahman II and Muhammad I. So that's before Abdurrahman III.
Okay, but I mean, we're
he,
still in that area of golden age, you know.
It's still that era, yeah. Look, I mean, with the Christian sources, of course, none of them like have this concept of a golden age in Islamic Spain. Actually, if you look at contemporary, right, looking specifically at the Martyrs of Cordoba affair, the reason actually we know anything about that at all, actually, is because that there were some contemporary Christian writings from Cordoba and the surrounding area that were preserved and then later rediscovered. Actually, Rodrigo himself doesn't talk about the Martyrs of Cordoba episode because he had no knowledge of it, because those writings had not yet been, did not have access to those writings of Eulogius or Alvaro of Cordoba. I would say, yeah, also just in relation to the tolerance thing. I mean, I think one of the things that people miss is that, there were Christians and Jews paying dhimmi, living as dhimmis under Muslim rule, but it's also true that there were Muslims and Jews living under Christian rule too. So it's not like the tolerance, as you know, goes only one way under the Muslims. The Christians also, it's like the Christian kingdoms in Iberia also for a long time had these arrangements with Muslims where Muslims could live under their rule as long as they pay tribute and be like dhimmis. And that's what the kind of thing Rodrigo's endorsing. And he mentions at the very end of his story, Gothica, examples of Muslim forts coming to arrangements of King Ferdinand to pay him tribute, while retaining their rights, their life and property, and to the practice of their religion. So I think actually that's something the Christian kingdoms don't get enough credit for, actually, sometimes in the histories of Iberia, because they just say, oh, the tolerance as the Muslims rulers showed the tolerance. Not, well, what about the Christians? They too also had, they also didn't.
Actually, I'd like you to elaborate on that. I'm listening, but I got to do something. Elaborate on that for a minute or two.
Yeah, basically the Muslims who live under Christian rule in Spain, actually there's a term that's applied to them in scholarship, the mudéjares. Basically, there were many instances where Muslim communities who were under territories reconquered by the Christians, that they could actually, in many cases, they retain their lives and their property and even their religious status as Muslims, on condition that they abide by certain restrictions and pay tribute to the Christian authorities. So again, that's actually kind of like also the reverse dimitude I was talking about earlier, and that Rodrigo also has that conception, I think, within his historical works, and that. So it wasn't all just that, say, when Christians retook territory from Muslims, they killed all the Muslims and forced them to convert to Christianity. Actually, it was it's a bit more that kind of thing. Really, the forced conversions thing really only happens on a major scale after 1492. So, but yeah, for many, the fact is the Christian kingdoms in Spain weren't all just about intolerance and killing any non-Christian. As I think, that you have this misconception, it does popular misconception about say medieval Christian kingdoms, and that they're the intolerant ones while the Muslims are the tolerant ones. So
yeah, I mean that's the whole point, that everything's topsy-turvy down, and from golden age to intolerant Christians, intolerant Muslims. So he was around in the times of the Almohads, right? Almohads.
Yeah, Muwahidun. Yeah. Now, actually, that's interesting
how he describes them.
Well, the Almohads. So in this history, the Arabs.
The etymology of Almohad.
Almohad. Yeah. Almohad is it's from the Arabic al-Muwahhid. Yeah, al-Muwahhid, the monotheist.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I would just say this, actually, though. ISIS do not like the Almohads. They like the Almoravids, because they see the Almoravids as Salafis, but they say that the Almohads were Ash'aris, which is they see as a deviant school of Sunni Islam. So, but yeah.
But the Almohads, I mean, their defining characteristic based on their name, Al-Muwahhideen, means they believed in Tawheed, which is such a, usually it's associated with Salafis, right?
Yeah, but the Almohads were known for adhering to a particular trend in Sunni Islam, which is Ash'arism, and that for Islamic State is not acceptable. But they love the Almoravids because they say Yusuf bin Tashfin, that he united the Muslim lands and in Al-Andalus and fought back against the Christians and stopped the collapse of Muslim rule in Iberia, and the Almoravids were supposedly Salafis, so that they Islamic State and other jihadists, they love Yusuf bin Tashfin and the Almoravids.
Because of the Battle of Sagrajas, right?
Battle of Az-Zalaqa, because they're even one of the jihadist groups in West Africa, Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam wal-Muslim, which is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Their media wing is called Az-Zalaqa, which is referring to this battle. In relation to the Almohad,
and their names, I just find their names interesting. So the Almohads, Al-Muwahhideen, we just spoke about them. They're the Unitarians, or the people who believe in Tawheed. But the ones you're talking about that ISIS likes, Al-Muravids, which is actually Al-Murabitun, which means those who fight on the ribat. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Frontier jihadists. And I just say that to anyone who's watching now, because I did a video about the ribat. So this is a good way to show them, ISIS heroizes the Murabituns, which is really a generic word. I think we might have to wrap it up soon because people are saying they can't hear me, and this has been a rough one, and I'm grateful for whoever stuck around. And we'll Ayman. I'll have Ayman on again for another time about something else. But let me see if we have any more questions here, and then I'll let you kind of wrap it up. Lies destroy. Oh, sorry, I've seen these. Where can I get? Okay, Kristen, where can I get a good poster timeline highlighting Islamic battles of history? I can't keep my centuries straight. Do you know anywhere, Ayman?
No, I don't know of a good one. That's maybe something we should do.
yeah, I know. This sounds like something I should be like in a book I write or something. Yeah, you're right. Let's see. Diamond Mind. Tolerance went both ways, but eventually the Spanish exiled their Muslim population in early 1600s. Can you discuss why the crown deported them? Yeah, Ayman, have at it.
So initially after 1492, there was a bit of when the Muslim sovereignty ended, there was a bit of a shift in the mindset, or that towards imposing Christianity. So the Muslim population who did remain, that after an initial brief period, it was eventually stipulated they should convert to Christianity or leave. And the ones who did stay, that they outwardly converted to Christianity, but they mostly were doing it like in a taqiyya, sense, and that but inwardly adhering to Islam. So it became known as Moriscos. And there are actually quite a number of Morisco writings that we have actually from the 1400s, 1500s, all the way up to the eventual exile of the Morisco population. Basically, they were deported eventually because they were seen as being disloyal and not actually being sincere about their conversion. So they were exiled to North Africa. But yeah, we have quite a number of writings that they preserved that were Spanish language, written in Arabic script in Al-Khamiyado. Hopefully, in my future historical research, I can get on some of those writings. But yeah, that's the story in brief.
Okay, so that was the Archbishop and his findings, and again, I've always found them fascinating. So I'm glad you actually is this. There's been other translations around, or is yours unique?
No, mine's the
translation.
Mine's the first. Really? Mine's the first. Yeah. Actually, in particular, Historia Arab. So mine's the first English translation. History of the Arabs, in particular, there's only one other modern. I did an Arabic translation of that too. There's only one other modern translation besides the ones I did. There's a German translation from 2006 The problem is that the German translation has some inaccuracies in it. So I actually do point these inaccuracies out in my commentary on this story Arabim.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine's only English one. Exactly. Yeah.
That right there makes
hopefully
it go ahead.
Yeah. Hopefully I am also going to soon hopefully soon publish an English translation of the Gothic history, which was the main bulk of Rodrigo's History of Spain project. So hopefully that will be out too, and we can hopefully do a program on that as well.
Yeah. A lot of people, a lot of questions I'm seeing here. People want to know what your sort of religious, maybe ethnic background is.
Yeah, I was. I'm born into a Muslim family, and but that I think their Muslim background or not, it's when you my principle looking at history is that you should actually look at it as it is, not actually try to distort it for your ideological agenda and say depart from the facts and you should stick to what the evidence tells you. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Okay, and you're Syrian or Iraqi?
I'm Iraqi. My wife is Syrian. She has been listening in on the whole time during this interview, and we're together. We're together at our house in northern Syria. Yeah.
Well, be safe. Well, yeah. So, yeah, what is the situation in Syria now with the new ISIS guy? Well, I'm sure he's not quite as bad as that, but the former Al Qaeda guy. Are you there?
Look, I think that basically the vision that the rulers have here, or the president. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was going to say that the rulers here, I feel, particularly the president, he has this vision, I think, of like a Sunni-centric Syria, which is basically that, Sunnis are on top, majoritarian rule, and, the minorities can be tolerated if they submit to us. So we actually live in a minority village, actually. Where,
is he a Salafi?
Sorry?
Is he a Salafi?
Yes, by background he is. Yeah, he is. But, he does play also to the idea of particularly when he engages with external actors about tolerance towards minorities. But really, it's from a kind of position of subjugation. So we live in a minority village. But
what about
we live
the business that happened with the Druze? Can you speak about what happened to the Druze? Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, the Druze in the province of Suwaida in southern Syria, near on the border with Jordan, they long had their own kind of autonomy with these various factions of theirs in Suwaida. And what happened was in July, the government sent in troops sent in its own forces to basically forcibly impose control there. And in the process, you had large-scale massacres of Druze civilians. And that was undoubtedly driven by the fact that a number of, or many of the fighters within the government's forces, that they consider Druze to be infidels, and apostates from Islam. And actually, there's a Druze community in northern Syria who actually live under a forced conversion that was imposed by Jabhat al-Nusra back in 2015. So, but in my village, which is a minority village too, we are we outwardly act conciliatory towards the government. So we surrendered we surrendered the weapons we have to the government, and we just we act nice to them. But it's only because we're in an isolated position here, and we don't want angry Sunni mobs coming into our village. Thank you.
Sure you don't. All right, Eamon. Any last thoughts or words? Anything you want people to know about your book? You already said it'll be available in an electronic version. Anything else?
Well, no, listen, I am very, very happy. I just want to say, actually, to conclude, I'm very, very happy that, I have an audience here and you interested in this kind of stuff that I do in medieval history.
Oh, I'm always interested in that,
Yeah. It always feels like, and I talk to others about it, it's like, oh, this is a niche thing that you do, and, oh, yeah, it's interesting, but, not really a central interest. But
academically, aren't you like a classicist?
I am, yes, I am. Academically, I did my undergraduate degree at Oxford in classics of Oriental studies. Yeah, so actually, but learning Latin, which I studied for so many years, it's you can apply, whether it's classical, you can apply it to the medieval era too, while bearing in mind some differences. And there are many medieval works that are not translated from Latin into English, and they often are not always the easiest text to translate. I mean, History of the Arabs in particular actually has a number of difficulties linguistic that you need someone who knows the Latin to interrogate and dissect.
Yeah.
And that's how I spotted the errors in the German translation, for example. So, but yeah, I'm pleased. Let's continue to do these kinds of shows. And if people want to do something about Syria or they want to do something about medieval history, please, I'm very happy to talk.
Do you have anything you want to share, like a website, email,
Yes,
or social media?
yeah. Yeah, so if you go on, you Google my name, Ayman Al-Tamimi, you will find my Substack newsletter, and you can subscribe there for all my latest stuff, which does medieval stuff, Syria, jihadism, all kinds of it's all kind of a mix there. So I will, and also please, if you do want to buy my books, buy them one from Routledge on the Feth el-Andalus, the Conquest of Al-Andalus, and this Rodrigo's Minor Histories from Manchester University Press. So, yes, thank you all for having me today.
Okay, well, thanks for joining us, Ayman. This was fascinating. I'm a big fan. My background's also in classics, and studied primarily Greek, a little Latin. So we kind of have that similarity, actually, and then fusing it with the Arab studies and the Islam and all that. I've always, as you know, found this particular field fascinating. I might actually somewhere down the line recommend certain things that you can try to translate, because there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of stuff out there that's so important, and it's just not translated. Like this. Like I'm surprised to learn this is the first English translation of the archbishops. That's amazing, because it's such an important contemporary work from that time. And there's a lot more like that, actually. Do you have any further works in the,
I do, yes. So I do. So besides Rodrigo's Gothic history, I have another book coming out with Routledge soon. Hopefully sometime this year. The translation of the Chronicle of the World, which is actually by a contemporary of Rodrigo's, Lucas of Toy, and whom Rodrigo actually used as a source in his Gothic history. But he also, talks about Muslim-Christian battles, and so I'm hopefully that will be out sometime this year with Routledge, and if we want to do a show about that too, we can.
Okay, let me know at the time. Okay,
yeah.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks for joining us, Ayman. Good luck with the book, and good luck with your future works and translations. And keep me abreast to all that you do. And
thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Bye.
And all right, bye to everyone if you're still there. I don't know if I have anything left to say, but I'm still in exile. No, I'm kidding. I'm still out here in Europe doing my thing. And for all the comments about the beard, like I said, it's going to make a comeback. So just stay tuned. It's just and did the little facial break. But I've also got really great ideas. I was talking to some people, and coming up, not necessarily soon, because I want to actually devote a lot of time and energy to this. But while I'm in Europe, I plan on visiting a lot of possibly important battle sites and sites that have interesting histories that go back, that really, that basically are like what I do, my books, the nexus of the West and Islam and the clash, because where I'm at and where I'll be going, there's a lot of that. So I actually hope to make videos, from the ground about these areas where I'll be visiting, battle sites and the regions where certain kings lived, and go see their statues and possibly in museums and whatnot. So stay tuned for that. And other than that, I'm just looking at some of your comments here. Oh, there's Dose of Truth helping out in the background. That's great. And yeah. Stay safe in Europe. Yeah, I'm trying. Learn so much. Great. Glad to hear all that. So without any further ado, bye. All right. Take care. And I'll see you again soon.